One of my favourite things to do on this channel at the minute is take a period of time and look at things as they happened, to try and figure out whether or not a particular time period was as good as we thought it was, as bad as we thought it was, or if it was merely circumstances, or if the driver that I'm talking about in a particular video was simply underrated because statistics don't tell the whole story. If you've been here before, then you'll know how this works. If you're new here, hello. The last time I did one of these, I looked at Daniel Ricciardo because his time in Formula 1 is looking set to end, as he's just been given the boot from the Red Bull family, leaving for the second time, although the first time he left was purely voluntary. Was he getting complacent waiting for Perez getting the boot? Did his performances from 2014 to 2017 tell the whole story of how good he was, and was it a case of him being screwed either way? If he stays at Red Bull, he plays second fiddle to Verstappen. If he leaves Red Bull, then there's no guarantee of a good seat. Mercedes had their drivers sewn up, Ferrari had theirs, he was leaving Red Bull, McLaren was pants at the time, so Renault was really the only place he could go. And while he managed to boss the midfield more often than not, it wasn't exactly the Michael Schumacher their way to the front type of thing that he might have hoped for. And when it comes to these kinds of retrospective videos, some of them do cross over. Juan Pablo Montoya's Formula 1 career overlaps with the Williams BMW years, which should have been mega, but they weren't due to BMW having their way of doing stuff and Frank Williams having his way of doing stuff. Then there's also the Downfall mini-series within this retrospective series, which forms part of the wider Storytime series that covers the likes of Brabham, Lotus, Benetton and Jordan, and there might be a couple more teams to do in that series as well. There's usually a trigger point for those. Dodgy sponsorship deals, the death of the owner, founder and visionary behind the team, changes in ownership to people that just simply don't care, that sort of thing. And it's interesting to see how things get worse for a particular team that sees them slide down the grid into obscurity, whether that's being unable to attract sponsors, having to rely on paid drivers for survival, and other concerns. In the case of Jordan, it was, among other things, the rise in manufacturer interest in Formula 1, and simply being unable to compete with the manufacturer's spending, to the point where it's just Jordan and Minardi languishing at the back of the field. Today, we're crossing Robert Kubica over with something. We've got BMW Sauber, something that one outlet on the internet is calling a cautionary tale from history, given that Sauber is about to become a factory team once again. When BMW re-entered Formula 1 in 2000 after about 13 years away, they seemed to have some sort of plan about them. They were teaming up with Williams, the most successful team of the 1990s who had dominated with Adrian Newey designed vehicles and for a brief period, active suspension, traction control, automatic gearboxes and anti-lock brakes. But the partnership ended up being, well, lackluster. Not only were Michael Schumacher and Ferrari the kings of Formula 1 at the time, BMW and Williams struggled with unreliability in some cases, and it came oh so near in 2003, something that some reckon should have been Montoya's championship, if not for a couple of things that always come up when this is mentioned. The Michelin tyres that had to be changed when Ferrari protested their construction. Basically, they flexed too much, and had been in use and fully legal since the 2002 San Marino Grand Prix, and Montoya also got a bizarre penalty for being hit by Barrichello at Indianapolis. So after 2005, the BMW-Williams partnership died with a whimper. BMW were off somewhere else because BMW had decided that during their partnership with Williams, they needed to have their own team involved in Formula 1, where they had full control, and weren't just some sort of partner or outside contractor. They would build the car, they would build the engines, and there would be no fighting over who should do what. And BMW knew how to have success in Formula 1. Nelson Piquet had won the 1983 championship in a BMW-powered Brabham that had the inline-4 turbocharged engine that always seems to gain horsepower every time it's mentioned. It was 900, then it was 1000, now we're at 1600 for some reason, although it has to be said that the 1983 engine didn't have the power that a lot of people seem to quote. The 1400 horsepower hand grenades were from 1986, and even then those engines were only used in qualifying, with the engines being good for about 5 minutes of running at full tilt before they were chucked in the bin, along with the qualifying specific gearboxes and the qualifying specific tyres. I know I mention all of this every time this period comes up, but there are still some people out there that don't quite understand that those engines weren't run at those power levels all the time. And it wasn't just in Formula 1 they knew how to build a racing machine. They'd won the Dakar 6 times between 1981 and 2000. There was the M1 Pro car, the E30 M3, and won the DTM Manufacturers' Championship 7 times in a row, which is still a record. And they won the 1988, 1991, 1992 and 1993 British Touring Car Championship with the likes of Tim Harvey and Joe Winkelhock. In addition, you've got 2009, 2014, 2018, 2019 and 2024 with Colin Turkington and Jake Hill. So it didn't matter if it was open wheels or tin tops, BMW knew what it was doing. So when the deal with Williams started to go all tits up, they decided to abandon Williams and buy into a new team, specifically Sauber. The purchase of the controlling stake in the Sauber team happened midway through the 2005 season, with BMW taking over the whole team with Peter Sauber kept on as an advisor and retaining 20%. Prior to this, Sauber had enjoyed a close relationship with the Ferrari team, essentially being the Haas of the 2000s, which might be why they were able to stick around longer than the likes of Jordan and Minardi did, who were nowhere near as competitive and had to sell up. It would also mean that Formula 1 still had a decent amount of manufacturer input. But one thing that's cool about the takeover is that the majority of the stuff that was Sauber still remained within the team. Two of Sauber's major sponsors, Credit Suisse and Petronas, signed new sponsorship deals with BMW, despite the team having changed hands. On the driver front, Jacques Villeneuve was retained by the team because they decided to honour his 2-year deal instead of terminating it due to the new ownership. The team was also split between two bases, the original Sauber base in Switzerland and one in Munich. The Sauber factory based in Hinwil would build the cars, and the factory in Munich would build the engines, which were now going to be 2.4 litre V8s. So BMW for the first time in its history was going to have a fully fledged factory Formula 1 team, and at the Bahrain Grand Prix, the F106 turned up and was ready to rumble. Much like 2000 had been with Williams, BMW saw the 2006 season as being a transitional one. The idea was to be semi-competitive and learn the ins and outs of chassis design and mating that to a good engine, which is something they hadn't ever had to do prior to 2006. Before this, with Williams and Brabham, it was, here's your engine, now go and win with it. It would be the same sort of deal if McLaren in 2026 decided, you know what, let's build our own engines like Red Bull are doing, but without copying Honda's homework. John Newhouse and Nick Heidfeld had a car designed by the team of Willy Ramph, Jackie Eckelhart, Christoph Zimmermann, Phil Arnaboldi, Seamus Malarkey and Dirk de Beer. But it needs to be pointed out that the car had been designed by Sauber rather than BMW due to the whole design it during 2005 when the team was still called Sauber stuff. But still, BMW had the car now and it was on them to develop it into something competitive. Something that, with Sauber's wind tunnel being one of the best at the time and BMW's almost bottomless pockets, should be a doable thing. There's the old story of Volkswagen approaching Sauber to borrow their wind tunnel so that they could do some development work for the Bugatti Veyron, only for Sauber to go, hang on a minute, you want to go how fast? Sorry boys, but we can't get it to go that high. I love that car. The 2006 season was alright. More often than not, Heidfeld was able to get into the top 8 and score points, this being a period where the FIA was handing points out to the top 8 rather than the top 6 that it had been before and the top 10 that it is now, if you follow me. Heidfeld's season was way more productive than Newhouse's, because Mr. You Can't Use My Name in F1 games only scored points on 4 occasions, and only finished ahead of Heidfeld once. But despite the lack of performance, Villeneuve liked driving the F106 due to it having aerodynamic qualities similar to that of an Indy car. But having fun in it doesn't really give you a let-up if you're not performing, and BMW were growing increasingly annoyed at the lack of results versus Heidfeld, and the BMW board of directors were probably having similar thoughts as to what Benson and Hedges and Mugen were having during 1998. You've got a world champion in this car on big money, why isn't he returning on our investment? Villeneuve had 7 points from 11 races by the time they went to Germany, while Heidfeld had 13 and was in 10th. During the German Grand Prix though, Villeneuve crashed out and totaled the car. In the aftermath, he told the team that he was still suffering from muscle pain and stiffness, so the team elected to call up test driver Robert Kubica for the Hungarian Grand Prix, and BMW wanted to take the time to evaluate Kubica to see if he was deserving of a race seat in 2007. With no assurances of his driver's status beyond the Hungarian Grand Prix, Villeneuve and BMW terminated his contract through mutual consent. It was a decision that paid off for BMW. Kubica was 7th in Hungary before being disqualified for being underweight, and then got a 3rd place at Monza. If he hadn't been disqualified from the Hungarian Grand Prix, he would have outscored Villeneuve. So Kubica was kept for the 2007 season, and the F107 would be BMW's first car that was all theirs. Their design, their engine. It featured the same blue and white livery with flashes of red, so the M Sport colours, and wasn't too much of a departure from the previous car. One thing to note about the BMW cars is that they tended to mount their rear wings on the end plates rather than using a central pylon used by the likes of McLaren, Ferrari and Renault. It also had one of these seamless shift gearboxes. What that means is if you're in 4th gear, 5th gear is spinning up and is ready to go. I think 3rd might be spinning up as well, but the article that I was reading to get all the information just had people arguing in a comment section that wasn't really useful. But the benefit of these is that when you pull the paddle to go up into 5th gear, it's there. You don't need to faff around, and you get up into 5th with minimal rev drop and minimal power loss. At least, that's how I understand it. Ferrari and McLaren were by far the best cars on the grid that year, which meant that BMW were basically leading the best of the rest for the season. 46 of the possible 51 podium positions were filled with some combination of Raikkonen, Massa, Hamilton and Alonso, which meant that the best that the BMWs could hope for over the course of the season was going to be 4th. Despite this, Heidfeld scored 2 podium places, one at Canada where Kubica suffered his horror shunt, and again in Hungary, a race where the McLarens had their moment in the pit lane and then got penalties coming out of their arseholes. But for the most part, Heidfeld and Kubica were finishing 4th. The car was also a great qualifier, with Heidfeld able to get his car on the front row of the grid at Hungary and would be able to get in among the 2 McLarens and 2 Ferraris. The car also qualified in the top 10 at every race, except for the Belgian Grand Prix where Kubica was down in 14th. The 2007 season also saw the debut of a young whippersnapper called Sebastian Vettel, and he took Kubica's seat at the 2007 US Grand Prix because Kubica was sidelined after that smash in Montreal. That's a race I need to cover at some point. The F107 was such an improvement on the previous year's car that Kubica and Heidfeld were able to almost triple the points haul of the 2006 season, so that come the end of the season they were 3rd in the standings. Although due to the disqualification of the McLaren team after the fallout from Spygate, this was bumped up to 2nd. If they were able to find that extra couple of percent and get to around the pace levels of McLaren and Ferrari in 2008, then they should be onto something. The F108 came out of the starting blocks in a very competitive manner. BMW had cleaned up the frontal zone of the car to initiate a smoother airflow over the front end of the car and then towards the rear, and make the whole thing incredibly efficient on the aero to extract more performance. One of the other things they added to the car were these antlers on the nose to help with some extra downforce while extracting the most out of the front wing aero loophole, having the central part of the front wing around the support pylon significantly lower than the end plates to produce more downforce and improve the airflow under the chassis. It was so fast out of the blocks that Heidfeld came 2nd in Australia, just 5 seconds behind race winner Hamilton. At Malaysia, Kubica had his turn on the podium in the car with another 2nd place, while Heidfeld grabbed the fastest lap. At Bahrain, Kubica became the first pole on pole as he managed to beat Massa to the fastest time by little more than 1/4 of a tenth, but he was a little bit slower in the race and could only finish 3rd behind the 2 Ferraris. But because of the BMW's consistency in both cars scoring points over the first few races, when they left the Bahrain Grand Prix, they were leading the Constructors' Championship. When they got to Monaco, things were still looking pretty good. Kubica was 2nd, just 3 seconds behind Hamilton, but on the other hand, Heidfeld had dropped down the field and finished 4 laps down because he had chassis issues. But other than that, they were still incredibly competitive and looked really good at the tighter street circuits. Then came BMW's day of days, the 2008 Canadian Grand Prix. It was just 12 months on from, and I'll call it what it is once more, the horror shunt. Kubica went on to take the checkered flag and lead home a BMW 1-2, and this was a race where Massa finished in 5th due to refueling issues at his pit stop. Also, Hamilton had eliminated both himself and Raikkonen in a complete bonehead move. Basically, he hadn't noticed that the red light at the end of the pits was on and the Ferrari had stopped alongside Kubica. In turn, Hamilton was hit by Rosberg, and both Hamilton and Rosberg copped a penalty. It's another race I need to look at in the wider Storytime series, but I'll give you some extra stats. In winning the race, Kubica became the first driver born on the other side of the Iron Curtain to win a Grand Prix. He became the first Polish driver to win a Grand Prix, and it was also the first win for a German constructor since the 1962 French Grand Prix, when Dan Gurney won for Porsche. Because of Kubica winning that race and Hamilton no scoring, he leaped up into the lead of the Drivers' Championship, ahead of Hamilton, Massa, Raikkonen and Heidfeld. Kubica had 42 points, Hamilton 38, Massa also on 38, Raikkonen on 35, and Heidfeld a little bit further back on 28. But with the BMW being as competitive as it was, it could be a 3-horse race for the championship. Everyone was looking at Hamilton versus Raikkonen before the season started, which then became Hamilton versus Massa. But nobody had seen Kubica coming out of nowhere. And as soon as BMW had appeared, they disappeared. BMW, in a rather bizarre decision, had decided that they ticked all of their boxes for 2008. Pole position? Done. 3rd place? Done. 2nd place? Done. Win? Done. They ticked everything off that they wanted to do, and with 2009 promising heavily revised cars in probably the biggest reset of the regulations since the 1994 season, BMW decided, which we all know as a bad decision, to jack in almost all the development on the 2008 car and send all available resources to the 2009 car, so they could potentially get a head start and maybe have a rocket ship come the end. A small sacrifice to make, they must have thought. While the championship seemed on for Kubica, we never got to find out whether it was truly on. As the Bring Back V10's podcast mentioned, BMW had laid out a set of goals that they wanted to achieve, and with the 2 podiums in 2006 they were a good chunk of the way there, even if that season was a transitional period for them. First season they wanted to be within 1.5 seconds of the lead cars and improve on 8th in the Constructors. Done. In 2007 they were 3rd, although bumped up to 2nd with the Spygate punishments. Done. Then in 2008 they won the Canadian Grand Prix, so all of that was done. Win and a 1-2. Tick, tick, boom. So with all their goals completed, some bigwigs at BMW said, right lads, switch everything over to the 2009 car, and some of the top bods at the F1 team also thought that this was a good idea. They had an opportunity staring them in the face and refused to take it. The cars were still scoring points though, but in France Kubica was 5th, then Heidfeld was 2nd in the rain-affected British Grand Prix. They were then 4th and 7th in Germany, 10th and 8th in Hungary, but a podium came for Kubica in Valencia. 2nd for Heidfeld in Belgium, but that was a lottery with the rain in the last 2 or 3 laps and Hamilton getting his penalty, and then 3rd for Kubica at Monza, which was also rain-affected. Singapore, 6th and 11th. Japan, 9th and 2nd, but Kubica was helped by Massa and Hamilton having mares that I need to look at in a future video. They were 5th and 6th in China and then out of the points in Brazil. Basically, any good results they got weren't really because of the car being good, they just cashed in on other stuff going wrong. This 2009 car that BMW was developing had better be the mutt's nuts, as Kubica was left understandably peeved at the lack of development on the 2008 car. At the end of the season, BMW had 135 points and were once again 3rd. Yeah, alright, they were 2nd the previous year, but they were 40 points or so off the Ferraris that won the championship, and probably could have taken 2nd from McLaren given that Hamilton was doing all the heavy lifting. Kubica was 23 points behind title winner Hamilton. That's less than a race win today, but back then you only got 10 points, so in those days that's a decent gap. Kubica even said that there had been parts developed for the 2008 car that never saw the light of day because the cost to replace them could be spent on the new car. So was this 2009 car powered by a warp drive and had more grip than the 2020 Mercedes? Lol, no. Most of the problems came from the KERS system. KERS, Kinetic Energy Recovery System. Push to pass. Hybrid, if you watch the British touring cars. BMW was so happy with their progress on this system, they said no when all the other teams on the grid wanted to defer the system until 2010. Problems had arisen early with this new technology, as a mechanic had been given an electric shock while working on one of the cars. At the same time, BMW had not managed to get their heads around the snowplow front wing that had come in for the 2009 season, and they'd missed the double diffuser loophole that had been exploited by Williams, Toyota and Honda, now called Brawn, when Honda withdrew at the end of 2008. Kubica had been going strongly in Melbourne until he was wiped out by Vettel in the closing stages. McLaren and Ferrari slipped back because their focus had been on a championship battle in 2008, so they hadn't put much into the 2009 car. So, with all of that going on, BMW had a chance to leapfrog. Instead, they slipped back to 6th in the standings, as Brawn, Red Bull and even Toyota got the better of them. They had sunk so much time and resources in, to the detriment of a potential championship or even 2nd in the championship. They'd cocked it up. Royally. 2 podiums were all they had to show for it, the first being scored in Malaysia. If you know what happened there, everybody was given half points because it was rained off, so once again, a good BMW result came because of circumstance rather than pace. After that, it was a best of 4th as BMW scored a lowly 36 points, but another podium did come at the Brazilian Grand Prix. That one probably was on pace because I don't see any asterisks that stick out. After that, BMW left Formula 1, just like Honda and Toyota. They cited the global financial crisis as the reasons, but they did maintain a sponsorship deal for Sauber as it would be once again for 2010, selling the team back to Peter. Unlike Toyota, BMW at least had things going in the right direction. They bought into a team that had a lot of experience and decent facilities, and they signed talented, consistent drivers in Kubica and Heidfeld to bring in as many points as possible. Unlike Toyota, who seemed to just hire anybody and stick them on massive money deals. The joke of Ralf Schumacher being paid so much money that Toyota must have thought they'd signed the other one. The way that they went about it had undertones of, yes, this lot are serious. Kubica is rapid, Heidfeld's solid, and they've not just hired a one-race wonder who hasn't been the same since he smashed his legs in 1997. And with Hamilton and Massa doing their utmost to try and lose the 2008 championship, there was opportunity after opportunity presented for BMW to pick up the dregs where Hamilton and Massa weren't scoring points. Fuji was proof of this, but there were other races where they could have picked up so much more. Just like the Williams years, it should have been mega, but BMW decided that ticking a box was more important than a push, hoping to get clever and get a head start. But that failed. They messed up the front wing, they messed up the curve system, they messed up, well, the whole car. It seemed that BMW was operating to a schedule and not taking opportunities that came ahead of that schedule. They had the equivalent of a 5-year plan, which is fine, you need to set goals, you need to set targets, but these felt more corporate than anything else. Their way of looking at it was, oh, we'll see where we are in 17 races' time. They needed to be seeing where they were now. Well, now in that time, you know what I mean. And with Audi coming in soon to take over at Sauber, they need to make sure they don't fall into the same trap. They need to hit the ground running, even more so now you've got things like cost caps and other bits and pieces like that to keep things a little more under control. But with Audi having all those changes at the top, just like BMW did when they came in for Williams, there's every possibility that history's going to repeat itself. So then, a look at the BMW Sauber years and how, just like the Williams years, they could have or should have been absolutely mega, but they weren't because they weren't going to take the opportunities that were in front of them. If this has been an interesting look through the motorsport history books, then do like the video so I know I've done a good job. And for more stuff like this, get subscribed and also get the bell on so you will always be notified of anything else I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the fine lads at Patreon. And if you want to help keep things running around here, a link to Patreon will be in the description, along with links to Discord, socials and other bits and bobs you might want or need to know, like my affiliates and other things like that. Other super thanks if you just want to buy me a coffee, and memberships for a Patreon alternative. So until next time, I've been Millward. Have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.